Hi, sweet ones. My name is Grandma Kitty, and tonight I want to tell you about a story that starts with love and luxury, but don't let the fancy houses fool you, because behind all that shine was a secret that would lead to one of the wildest twists I've ever told. But before we begin, kindly tell me what country you're watching from tonight. This is how we find our neighbors in this little family of ours. It was a calm autumn evening in one of Long Island's most exclusive neighborhoods. Inside a grand home on Middle Lane, millionaire Ted Ammon settled in for the night. The alarm system was off, the lights were low, and everything seemed quiet, ordinary, even. Nothing looked disturbed or out of place. But by the next day, that calm was gone. What police found inside the master bedroom would send shockwaves through the Hamptons and uncover a story tangled with jealousy, money, and betrayal. This wasn't random misfortune or a break-in gone wrong. What happened to Ted came from much closer to home than anyone wanted to believe. Robert Theodore Ammon, though everyone just called him Ted, was born way back in August of 1949 in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. His father worked for a steel company handling pension plans, and his mother, Betty, stayed home to raise the children. She was a sharp woman, smart as a whip, and always setting the bar high for her kids. Betty believed in hard work and big dreams. She used to tell them, "Don't just settle, reach higher." Ted grew up with his older sister, Sandy. Those two were close and a little competitive too. When Sandy practiced her piano lessons, Ted would listen carefully and then, just for fun, play the same tune right back by ear. Folks realized early on that Ted had something special. Whether it was schoolwork, sports, or hobbies, he always seemed to shine. The Ammon household was full of love, but also full of high expectations. They believed in effort and curiosity, two things Ted had in spades. His childhood moved between quiet New Jersey shore towns and family trips out to Iowa. Life back then, in the 50s, was steady and simple, but you could already tell Ted was meant for more. When Ted was a teenager, his family moved again, this time to Aurora, New York, after his father got a new job. Ted fit in easily. He was friendly, smart, and confident. Teachers respected him, his friends looked up to him, and the girls noticed him too. He hadn't quite figured out what he wanted to do with his life yet, but everyone knew he'd go far. In 1967, Ted went off to Bucknell University. At first, he thought he'd be an architect, but after a while, he realized numbers and business excited him more, so he switched to economics. He graduated in 1971. Now, Ted wasn't just about studying, he was a natural leader. He joined the Phi Gamma Delta fraternity, played on the varsity lacrosse team, and even became student body president. That job taught him a lot: how to listen, how to negotiate, and how to lead, all skills that would serve him well later in life. After college, Ted landed a spot in Bank of America's executive training program. He was sharp, the kind of man who never stopped learning. Even without going to law school, he studied on his own and passed the New York bar exam on the first try. That's how determined he was. Around that time, he met a woman named Randy Day, smart, ambitious, just like him. They married in 1973 and headed off to London for work. Life there was busy but exciting. They earned good money and enjoyed the city lifelong work days, elegant dinners, and big plans for the future. But as the years went by, the long hours and constant pressure started wearing them down. The marriage that had once been full of love slowly turned into more of a friendship. After 10 years, Randy decided it was time to move on. In 1983, she filed for divorce. It wasn't ugly or bitter, they simply grew apart. Ted was heartbroken for a while, but he threw himself into his career with renewed energy. He left law behind and moved into investment banking, where his real talents started to shine. In 1984, he joined one of the biggest names on Wall Street, Kohlberg, Kravis, Roberts, or KKR for short. KKR was the kind of firm that changed the world of business, buying huge companies and reshaping them from the inside out. Ted fit right in. He was quick, clever, and confident, the kind of man who saw patterns others missed. He worked on one of the biggest deals in American business history, the $31 billion buyout of RJR Nabisco, the same one that later inspired the book Barbarians at the Gate. That deal made him a legend in finance circles. People admired how he could take apart a complicated problem and rebuild it in his head like it was nothing. By the time he left KKR, Ted had made a fortune, but he wasn't the kind of man who liked standing in anyone's shadow. He started his own ventures, a printing company called Big Flower Press and a private equity firm called Chancery Lane Capital. Both were successful, and for a while, Ted had it all: money, freedom, and respect. And that's when his life took a turn, not in business, but in love. One day in 1984, Ted was supposed to meet a real estate agent to look at an apartment. Work ran late, and he missed the appointment. He called to apologize, and they rescheduled. That second meeting changed his life, because that's when he met Generosa. She was young, bright, and full of energy. Ted was immediately drawn to her. They had coffee after the showing, and sparks flew. Within a month, they were living together. Generosa poured her heart into decorating their home. She had a real eye for color and design. But soon, she wanted more. She wanted marriage. Ted, still healing from his divorce, wasn't ready. After a year together, she gave him an ultimatum: either marry her or let her go. Ted chose to walk away, and Generosa was devastated. She even called Ted's family to tell them how hurt she was. But fate has a funny way of circling back. A month later, they ran into each other at an art museum. Generosa was with another man, and seeing her like that made Ted realize he couldn't lose her again. Shortly after, he proposed. They married in 1986. Their marriage was glamorous. They had wealth, style, and influence, but underneath all that glitter was tension. Generosa herself had come from a difficult past. She was born in California into a family that prized creativity and independence. She was artistic and talented from the start, especially with painting and interior design. But her childhood wasn't easy. Her mother, Mary, was known for her unpredictable moods. Some in the family believed she struggled with bipolar disorder. Mary had once studied to be a nun, but left the convent after only a year, deciding she wanted excitement instead of devotion. She spent her life chasing parties, attention, and adventure. Mary married several times. Her first husband, a soldier, gave her 2 children, but she was never much of a mother. She preferred her social life to domestic life, and eventually, her husband left her. She remarried, had another daughter, and that relationship ended too. Then came Generosa, her youngest. Her father was an Italian sailor. Her mother had met at a party. The romance lasted a week, and though Mary wrote to tell him she was expecting, he never wrote back. Everyone knew that Mary's husband at the time wasn't the baby's real father. So, from the beginning, Generosa's life was complicated, a mix of creativity, charm, and chaos. But it was also that very mix that drew Ted Ammon to her in the first place. Generosa was actually named after her father, the man she never got to meet. Her early years were rough, the kind that make a person grow up before their time. Her mother, Mary, lived a wild and restless life. She brought different men into the house, often paying little attention to her children. Some say there were troubling things that happened with those men, though no one really knows for sure how much Mary understood or cared. What everyone did know was that she wasn't much of a mother. So, from a young age, Generosa learned to take care of herself. She became strong and clever, a survivor. She carried both her mother's creativity and a toughness that only hardship can teach. Those 2 things, her charm and her grit, would later shape the glamorous but chaotic life she shared with Ted Ammon. When she was just 10 years old, tragedy struck. Her mother passed away from cancer. That loss changed everything. Her older siblings went off to live their own lives, leaving Generosa and her younger sister to bounce between relatives. First an uncle, then other family members took them in. That loneliness left a deep mark on her. It made her independent, but it also made her wary. She didn't trust easily. As she grew older, Generosa turned into a striking young woman, smart, confident, and quick-witted. People often said she was just like her mother, fiery and unpredictable. She had big dreams, too. She didn't just want to survive anymore, she wanted to succeed. And she wanted wealth and recognition to prove she could. By the time she finished school, Generosa had her eyes set on New York City. She wanted to make it as an artist, to see her work hanging in galleries one day. But New York isn't kind to dreamers without money, so she found work as a real estate agent to pay the bills. Now, that was no easy job. The Manhattan property market was ruthless, full of big personalities and sharper tongues. But Generosa had both charm and determination, and she learned to hold her ground. Even after she married Ted, who by then was worth tens of millions, Generosa didn't stop working. Ted supported her creativity, even opening a photography studio for her to experiment with her artistic side. The couple became part of New York's social scene, hosting dinner parties that were as much about elegance as they were about showing off success. Eventually, the Ammons started talking about having children. But having a baby didn't come easily for Generosa. After years of trying, they decided to adopt. In 1992, they traveled all the way to Ukraine and adopted 2-year-old twins, a boy named Greg and a girl named Alexa. By then, Ted had made close to $50 million. The family lived in complete comfort. The twins had everything: private schools, tutors, vacations, and a beautiful home in East Hampton that Ted and Generosa designed together. On the surface, it all looked perfect, but inside those walls, things were far from peaceful. If you've made it this far, you're just like me. You need to know how this ends. But before we dig deeper, take a second to subscribe. It lets me know you're still out there listening while I tell you the dark part, the part that changes everything. Generosa could be difficult. She had a sharp tongue, and her moods could swing fast. Ted tried to be patient at first, but her temper wore him down. She could be sarcastic, cruel even, and she often picked fights about money or other people's success. When Ted suggested therapy, she refused. Jealousy was another battle. Generosa became suspicious of everything Ted did. She checked his messages, his phone, even his work papers. If she thought he was hiding something, especially another woman, she'd explode in anger. By the late 90s, Ted had started telling friends that he was thinking about divorce. The marriage had turned bitter. So, in 1999, the couple decided on what they hoped would be a fresh start. They moved to Surrey, England, and bought a grand old manor called Coverwood. Generosa threw herself into redecorating the house while Ted continued traveling back to New York during the week to run his businesses. But the distance between them, both physical and emotional, only grew. Ted spent weekends in England, and when he was away, Generosa's suspicions grew stronger. One day, she found a divorce lawyer's bill on his desk and convinced herself he was cheating. She even hired private investigators to follow him around. She became obsessed with the idea that he was seeing another woman, a high-powered banker in New York. She even claimed that this woman had Ted's child, though no proof ever supported that. It was clear to everyone around them that their marriage, once built on love, wealth, and ambition, was now held together by nothing but anger and mistrust. And before long, that tension would explode in ways no one could have imagined. By the year 2000, Generosa had reached her breaking point. She filed for divorce and demanded half of Ted's fortune, claiming it was worth $300 million. Now, Ted was rich, but not that rich. His real net worth was closer to $100 million. But that didn't stop the fight from turning nasty. The divorce became bitter fast. Generosa went back to New York with the twins, and she made it harder and harder for Ted to see them. Friends later said she even turned the children against their father, whispering things that made visits tense and uncomfortable. Ted tried to keep things civil. He gave her a beautiful Manhattan townhouse to renovate and sent regular support payments. But in Generosa's eyes, it was never enough. She wanted more money, more control, more power. Then, while remodeling that townhouse, Generosa met a man who would change everything, Daniel Pelosi. He was a contractor, a sort of jack of all trades. He wasn't licensed, but he knew how to fix things, wire things, and talk his way into work. Daniel was 38, 7 years younger than Generosa, and full of charm, the dangerous kind. Ted took one look at him and wanted nothing to do with him. It wasn't just jealousy. Ted saw right through him, and he was right to worry. Daniel had a past full of trouble, old assault charges, drunk driving, stealing electricity worth thousands from the power company, and a string of harassment complaints. He was the kind of man who'd burned every bridge and was now looking for someone to save him or bankroll him. Generosa, though, seemed to like the chaos he brought. Maybe it made her feel powerful again. Ted's dislike only made her more determined to show Daniel off. She'd flaunt their relationship, almost like she wanted to hurt Ted. But Ted wasn't angry about her moving on. He was scared for his kids. He watched as Daniel moved into his world, living in a house he had paid for, driving a fancy Porsche he had bought, and spending time with his twins. To Ted, it was unbearable. He tried reasoning with Generosa, but she refused to listen. The more she dug in her heels, the more Ted pulled back. He stopped some payments, changed property agreements, and made it clear his fortune wasn't as big as she claimed. He revealed his real net worth was closer to $30 million, not the 100 or 300 she had been saying. Even with that, the divorce settlement still would have made Generosa a wealthy woman. She was set to receive between $20 and $25 million, plus $21,000 a month in child support. But she still wasn't satisfied, and before anything could be finalized, tragedy struck. On a quiet October morning in 2001, Ted Ammon was found dead inside his East Hampton mansion. He was 52 years old. His driver and business partner discovered him lying naked on his bed, beaten to death. His skull had been fractured from several blows. The alarm system was off. No forced entry. Whoever did it knew that house well. When word spread, everyone looked straight at Generosa. Within 3 months of Ted's murder, she inherited nearly his entire fortune, $97 million, and then married Daniel Pelosi. It didn't take a detective to see why people were suspicious. Witnesses came forward saying Generosa had threatened Ted, even saying out loud that he deserved to die. Others told police she had offered money $50,000 to have him beaten. Then came a man named Christopher Pino, who claimed that on the night of the murder, he drove Daniel to Ted's house and waited outside. Daniel went in, stayed a while, and came back covered in blood, saying, "I think he's dead." And then other people swore they'd heard Daniel brag about killing Ted, that Generosa had wanted it done. Even Daniel's own father told police that his son had asked him how to get rid of evidence. But despite all the talk, there wasn't a shred of physical proof tying him to the crime. It was a case built almost entirely on people's words. Meanwhile, Generosa herself was running out of time. She had been diagnosed with late-stage breast cancer, and even in her illness, she pointed fingers, claiming Ted had known about a lump years earlier and never told her that it was somehow his fault she was sick. Doctors and psychologists who examined her described her as volatile and unpredictable, with traits of narcissism and paranoia. In 2003, when her health worsened, prosecutors offered her immunity, full protection, if she would testify before a grand jury about Ted's death. She refused. She said Daniel was innocent. That same year, in May, she passed away in her East Hampton home. Before she died, though, she'd turned on Daniel, too. The romance that started with excitement had turned into disgust. She'd grown tired of his drinking, his temper, and the way he burned through money that wasn't his. By the summer of 2003, she made him sign a post-nuptial agreement he'd get $2 million and nothing more. She rewrote her will, cutting him out almost entirely and leaving everything to her twins and their nanny, who would become their guardian. Daniel fought the will, of course, but he lost. And soon after, his own day in court came. By 2004, Daniel Pelosi was on trial for the murder of Ted Ammon. He admitted being at the East Hampton house that night, but claimed he didn't kill Ted, that it was all Generosa's doing. But one witness after another told the jury that Daniel had bragged about committing the murder himself. In January 2005, the verdict came in. Daniel Pelosi was found guilty and sentenced to 25 years to life in prison. Generosa never faced charges. She died 2 years before his sentencing. After all the chaos and heartbreak, Ted's sister, Sandra Williams, was given custody of the twins, Greg and Alexa. She promised to raise them in a calm, loving home, the kind of life Ted would have wanted for his kids. Years later, in 2012, those twins, now young adults, made a documentary called 59 Middle Lane, named after the house where their father was killed. They went back to that home, faced their memories, and tried to make peace with their past. Greg went on to work in film, while Alexa chose a quieter life. They still speak about their father with love and warmth, describing him as kind, generous, and steady. Their memories of their mother, though, are complicated, part admiration, part sadness. And through it all, those two children have carried their father's legacy with grace, proof that even after tragedy, love can still find its way through the ruins.